Bienvenidos. Welcome to our screening of On to Friends, Latinos in Vietnam. My name is Marius Vasquez Uniga, and I'm here representing KQED. At KQED, we are happy to celebrate our armed service members and their families today. And if we have the service members that we have in the audience, if you could please rise, we want to honor you with a round of applause. KQED wants to thank you for all that you've done to keep our country safe and for serving our country with honor and bravery. KQED has made a commitment to showcase Latino American shows on all of our media platforms this month. For the fourth year, we have come to the School of Arts and Culture at the Mexican Heritage Plaza to celebrate Latino Heritage Month. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Please look through the Latino Heritage Month insert for more of our events and special programmings, and make sure you follow us on Facebook and on Twitter, or go to kqed.org for more information on our latest news, arts, science, and educational content. It is my great pleasure to introduce our panel. Joining us tonight is a wonderful group of individuals whose work, insight, expertise can help us understand the film better, and who can bring perspective into military service and society today and during the Vietnam War era. And now our panel moderator comes to us from the History Department at UC Davis, an author and featured historian in the film, Dr. Lorena Oropeza.
Showing up on that table with me to talk about this wonderful film. Next we're going to have Dr. Gregorio Mora-Torres coming out. He is a professor at San Jose State University in the Mexican American Studies Department. Dr. Mora-Torres, you want to come sit down? We also have a woman who is very dear to my heart. She's one of the first people I ever interviewed, Dr. Lea Ybarra, who is an author, sociologist, and a professor emeritus from Johns Hopkins University. And then, to make sure this does not become literally too academic, we have an Air Force veteran, yes. Captain Graciela Tiscareno-Sato. She is an aviator, a pilot with the Air Force, and a veteran of the first Gulf War. This is really an honor to be with this group. My job is to be the moderator, and I have a general question to open it up. And the general question really was, how have we thought about Latinos and this war? But since I know we all have thought about Latinos and war, given our various research interests and life experiences, I thought that one way to have a general conversation, just to whoever wants to jump in could, is, can you tell me why a film like this that talks about Latinos in the military, why capturing these sort of stories are so important, and what does it tell us about events today? Does anyone want to jump in?
I'll go ahead and start. I think it's really critical, and I really want to thank Milen and everyone else who's involved with the film, because I think that those of us that have been as sociologists or historians involved know that the story of Latinos is too often not told. And when the question was about why were we involved in it, I know before, I was part of the Vietnam generation, and in my family we had war protesters. My brother who was a Marine, and I had 14 cousins in Vietnam. And I saw these films coming out in the 60s and 70s and 80s about Vietnam, and yet Latinos were never present in there. So I felt it was really important, like so many of us, to make sure that that story was told. And so I think it is really critical that we follow that up, so with films, with even more books on it. Because, for example, the voice of women was not involved in Vietnam, and now that there are women in combat, we've got to tell those stories as well. So I think it's never too late, and it's always timely to have films like this and books on Latinos and how they've served their country.
I think I'm going to look at the local angle. Ever since World War II, Korea, Vietnam. You have had hundreds and hundreds of Latinos, Mexican Americans from the local area, from the Central Valley, from Salinas. And a lot of them went by choice. In fact, you're gonna see some of the people that are out here in the film, you know, they were going to Vietnam because they thought it was a patriotic duty to fight. And they're following the tradition of the parents. It could be that there are some Latinos that fought in World War I. Definitely there are hundreds of thousands of Latinos who fought in Second World War, and obviously a similar number for people in Korea. In San Jose, you have students right at high school who are being drafted to go into the armed services. Some do it by choice. Other times, people have no choice. If they commit a crime and they're actually the judges often give them the choice: go to jail or go to the armed services. And that's a record that you see all the time. And so you're gonna find that in San Jose, you're gonna have a lot of students, a lot of people going to war right out of high school. And a lot of them come back wounded. A lot of them end up losing a friend, a relative. And you see that everywhere, not only in San Jose, but in Salinas, and obviously from the Central Valley. And that's the story that we rarely ever hear, and that's the reason why this film is going to be important for us to see.
Graciela, do you want to try to address that question as well? Like I know and we all have prepared comments, but just as a general opening question.
I'm going to piggyback on the thought of invisibility is not okay. It's really not. And I will just answer the question by channeling my inner Sal Castro, for those who know the name from East LA. Before he passed, I had the chance to speak with him at a couple of conferences, and what I remember very much about him is two things. His business card and the placard that was always in front of the podium that said, "No sean mensos, go to college and graduate." And the other one, which he said, I mean, that's on his card, right? And the other one was that if we don't become educated and write our stories, then they will write about us, if they write about us at all. So it's, be the change you want to see. And I was in the Air Force for 9.5 years, and about 3 years ago, I made a phone call to a pilot in San Antonio because I saw a story in the paper when I was there. I said, I want to find out what you guys are doing, taking Hispanic kids out to the airplanes. This is cool, right? He says, you don't want to talk to me, you want to talk to Olga. I said, who's Olga? Olga Custodio. She was the first Latina military pilot ever in the US. I'm like, what? I'm like, I don't even, so I'm Googling, right? Like, Olga Custodio, there's nothing, zero content. So he hooked me up, and I had the honor of interviewing her, first Latina to go to Air Force pilot training the year they opened it up to women. I was in the Air Force for almost a decade, never knew her name, never knew anything. So I wrote the story about her, the first one, and then eventually they sent a TV crew. There's a video now, if you can remember that name. She's now been on national television telling her amazing story of what it was like to be the first. But it's because we have to tell the stories, and I take that very, very seriously, as you'll see with what I'm going to show you later. So that's why I feel this is so important, is that invisibility is not okay.
I'll add to that, and I'll put the other side, in the sense that even when these stories have been told, there is a willful ignorance on the part of some Americans. So I don't want to mention his person. That just came out. But there's this guy who says, he makes it so clear. He says, that there's this viciousness of anti-Mexican sentiment, and it willfully ignores more than a century and a half. And actually, if you want to look at Latinos serving in the U.S. Armed Forces, you need to go to 1776. But a long, long, proud history of service and sacrifice that is being willfully ignored, even when this is not invisible. There have been books written about it. So
by us, by others.
By me, yeah. By her, yes. So yeah, there's still so much that's left undone, but even when work has been done, and what's really important in this case, I think, is that the working assumption among that type of politics is that Mexicans are not Americans. I mean, by definition, it's an oxymoron, right? You can't have a Mexican American. So the power of this film is to capture just part of this long and proud history, and to also underscore how military service has been a means of economic uplift, a means of educational attainment, a means of citizenship belonging, and also sometimes a means of finding your way to an early death. And so these are all parts that Latinos have embraced and struggled with, and that's why I think this is such an important film. So, well, thank you for your preliminary comments. I am going to then direct, I'll let Gregorio, can you expand on your comments on the local angle about Latinos in the Vietnam War, and also how inevitably Latinos in the Vietnam War overlapped and coincided and conflicted with other social movements at the time?
The leadership of the Mexican American community, of the Latino community, and they take it upon themselves to begin to bring down traditional racism, discrimination. And for the next 20, 30 years, that's what they do. They go out and they challenge the system. They challenge people like Trump, you know, because they're there still. And so they're trying to bring down those barriers. Okay? In the 1960s, Mexican Americans continued to fight the struggle for equality. And so they sometimes collaborate with African Americans. They work with Asian Americans in political movements. Okay? And a branch of them begins to challenge, they begin to question the war in Vietnam. Lea Ybarra, who appears in this film, is one of those early anti-war activists. And Lea Ybarra is one of them. You know, she won't tell you that, but you know, she was one of those early anti-war Vietnam activists because they realized that American society, even though Mexican American Latinos are fighting in Vietnam and fighting in Korea, equality is not there yet. And that's what they want. And they want to challenge. They want to make America into a more just society. Okay? And they do that by challenging that. So you have two factions. The patriotic people who go out and fight because they believe that in time things will improve. And then you have the other factions who begin to challenge society for a better world, for a better life for Mexican Americans and Latinos. And so the community, you know, is fighting those two battles at the same time. And eventually they make alliances with the anti-war movement at the national level. They make alliances with Martin Luther King. You have individuals like, you know, Cesar Chavez. You have individuals like Corky Gonzalez, you know, marching in Washington in 1963. And so they're part of this larger group of people who realize that America, if it's going to become a place for everybody, has to break down those racial barriers that has kept them in the past outside. And so they're calling for integration, they're calling for equality. And that's what the Chicano movement is all about.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that Vietnam was just an incredibly divisive war. One way to think of it, it was the most divisive American war since the Civil War. And so it makes sense that it impacted the Mexican-American population just like it impacted the nation as a whole. Yeah, thank you, Gregorio, that was really important. Lea, given that you wrote a whole book called Vietnam Veteranos, and you interviewed nearly 50 combat veterans and sometimes their family members, can you tell us something about the Latino experience in Vietnam, and if it was unique in any ways, or maybe it wasn't, but I'd like you to expand on that.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I really appreciate your comments because I think you're right, it sets it in perspective beyond just the Latino community, but it's a part of the whole civil rights movement, and it really educated us, I think, as a population. I think that when you look at the Vietnam experience and Latino experience in Vietnam, it was different in some ways, and I'll get to that in a second, but really it was very similar in many other ways. One was that the Vietnam War was a catastrophic war, and it impacted so many families. It was a terrible tragedy, and I think won't go into a lot of statistics, but I do want to do a few because I think that not everybody here understands the impact of that war. In the U.S., 57,000 Americans, the U.S. Americans, were killed in Vietnam, and over 300,000 were wounded. But sometimes we forget about the other side of it. Over 1,200,000 Vietnamese were killed, for 1,200,000. And more than 3 million civilians and military were killed. And we devastated that country with more than 1.2 million tons of bombs dropped on Vietnam. So I think when we look at the war, we have to look at, yes, what did it do to Americans and Latinos, but also what did it do to the Vietnamese as well. And then we can start seeing how many people it actually impacted.